So, what time is it?
Ordinary time.
Time for the sermon.
Time for the service.
Time for listening.
Time for listening. Oh, I could tell students have been in my class. It's the third week of the semester. Third week. So, have you figured out your priorities? Oh, why do you laugh? You had 3 weeks. You mean you don't know the most important preparation for ministry that you need to be about? You haven't figured out a strategic plan? Come on. You know, I knew a first-year student once who didn't have your problem. We admitted him, he got through orientation, and in my first conversation with him, he had it mapped out. He had read the catalog, scanned the prize list, and selected the 4 prizes he intended to work on the entire time he was here. But when I asked him why he had done that, his answer was very honest. He said, "I intend to be remembered." And you know, he was very successful at that. He received 3 of the 4 prizes that he had identified in his first year. The only problem is, for the life of me, I don't remember his name. So, how do you plan to be remembered? And this is a question not just to students, but my colleagues. How do we plan to be remembered? This is a very important question, because no one wants to be forgotten. No one wants to be left behind. No one wants to be overlooked. But being remembered is not an easy thing. So let me tell you a story. It's a story about an old woman and a child and a horse. Floribel, that was her name, Floribel, born in 1884, in a row between 12 other siblings, firmly planted in their rows on a vegetable farm by their now widowed mother. And Floribel flourished. She worked in a laundry, she got married, she had children. She and her husband had a grocery store during the Depression that kept many families for the railroad alive. But at the very end of the Depression, when nobody paid their bill, they lost the store and had to move to the country, move to the farm. And when she moved to the farm, Floribel vegetated in the best sense of that word. She had a change of heart and diet, at least as far as the cows and the pigs and the sheep were concerned. A change of heart and diet, because in this story, I understand, she couldn't bear to eat anything that had a name. And she named them all. So, as the story goes, the only creatures that didn't get named on that farm were the chickens. And once she had, as the saying goes, needed to talk to a man about a horse. Now, it happened when her firstborn grandson, John, came to visit. He was having the summer of his 5-year-old life. He'd head for the meadow at daybreak. He'd be singing and preaching to the birds and the frogs and the farm cats. And it turned out that that was pretty good practice for the day when he would fill one of the nation's high steeple Presbyterian churches. It was even better practice for the time when he stepped down from that pulpit and got behind a podium, called from church to the mission of making humans more humane when it came to other creatures. But to go back to the story, this summer morning, John was streaking across the meadow, desperate to find someone to help. He needed help. It was a horse. He heard the horse screaming, and the hired man was beating it with a stick, striking the horse repeatedly across its eyes. And John raced across the meadow to the porch, to the one he knew. Flora Bell. She was sweeping the porch. He probably made absolutely no sense. 5-year-old, caught in that terrible rage that makes you speechless. And all you can do is cry because you're a child and you can't end the violence. She listened very carefully, didn't say a word to him, and started marching across the meadow. Clear across the meadow, broom in hand. And when she got to where the hired hand and the horse was, right there in the middle of the haying season, in the middle of the meadow, she talked to a man about a horse and threatened to beat him with her broom. And then she fired him right in the spine. Now, what that firing meant was that she would have to take his place on the hay wagon, on top of all the other things that she did, like feeding and cooking. But she fired him. They were short-handed, but she fired him just the same. For 5-year-old John, that moment marked the beginning in his mind of the vision of a humane society, a real church that might include horses and field mice and elephants and lions and lambs and queens and kangaroos, a humane human society. Because his grandmother had taken a stand for animal rights, animal rescue, animal advocacy, without hesitation. She had not only believed a child, she had acted to prevent the violence. She had rescued an animal. This was a vision of Job and Jesus in defense of creation, a stewardship of this creation, a shepherding that stands guard against human destruction. So I went to the website, God bless Google, and although please do footnote when you use it, I went to Google John Hoyt, who became the president of the Humane Society of the United States, and had that position for over 26 years. And it says on Google that his main accomplishments were that he strengthened this organization, he developed a full-fledged wildlife protection program, he founded a youth education division, and launched an international journal for the study of animal problems. And this is what was written about him, John Hoyt. It has been said that one should never talk about politics or religion in polite company. Drew has never been polite company. But during his 26 years tenure as president of the Humane Society, John Hoyt not only tackled the unspeakable, he recruited the kind of professional staff rarely seen before in animal protection circles to speak for those creatures who can't speak for themselves. In fact, Hoyt, a former Presbyterian minister who became the longest-serving president, solidified the organization's reputation to a point where it became this advocacy, the defining characteristic a seemingly unlikely leader for animal protection organization, Hoyt was serving as senior minister of the First Presbyterian Church in Fort Wayne, Indiana, where he earned a good reputation as an institution builder. He was the son of a Baptist minister. That will make you happy. A boy who would later follow his own religious path. He was influenced, now this is on Google, he was influenced by his grandmother, a strict vegetarian who had great love and compassion for animals. She lived to be 106. My grandmother had 40 pet sheep, and each one had a name, Hoyt recalls. Well, some of you may have guessed or known, this is family talking. His grandmother is my grandmother. I heard that story growing up, but never from my grandmother. And in that process of understanding how one measures importance, I was fascinated that one action in a meadow to save a horse had such consequence. Who dreams these things? For the Humane Society gradually moved to those issues of wildlife protection, the intensive rearing of farm animals, the forefront of animal protection, the campaigning against the cruelty of the rodeo, the priority to overhaul the methods of ritual slaughter, the raising and feeding of farm animals, all those issues swirling around a summer morning in a meadow where someone says no and rescues an animal. Well, as some of you also know, things come to me in certain seasons and times that seem to others peculiar. Now they're very commonplace to me. So I just wanted to direct your attention to what's hanging here. It's a handmade quilt that I found in a Goodwill store in West by God, Virginia. And if you come close, you will notice that not only are peacocks adorning this, they're cats. Now, I'm not a cat person. I'm allergic. So of course, in a room where there's a cat, the cat always comes to me. But I am not a cat person. And this is not something that I thought about acquiring because of that fact until I read the quilt. This is written on the back. This quilt was a gift to the Arizona Humane Society to raise funds that would benefit animals in our care. It was entirely hand-sewn by Doris Bergen of Mesa, Arizona. Doris estimates that she spent 1,900 hours hand-sewing the unusual designs and used unusual antique buttons and lace in the blocks to enhance the overall effect. She placed a peacock in the center to show the significance of peacocks in the Levi, Arizona area. In the late 1800s and early 1900s, peacocks were used as watchdogs, and there were hundreds of them in the community. We will be forever grateful to Doris for this magnificent piece of handwork and for the animals who benefited from her hours spent taking tiny stitches. Now, what's the problem with that quilt? What's the mystery? We know Doris's name, but we don't know the name of the person who bought it, whose money went to provide for those animals. Whoever that person is has been forgotten to the place that when they died, somehow this quilt gets from Arizona, where it was hung, to a Goodwill store in West by God, Virginia, with a price tag of $25. What does the gospel teach us about how to be remembered? The good news is God does not forget. The good news is when the community, however humane, has forgotten your name, you will be remembered. That little lamb that had a name, but we don't know its name, that gets lost, left behind, overlooked. The shepherd knows its name and goes after it. Now I want to say something directly about my first cousin. He's dying. All this week, every call from home, I thought would bring that news a little closer. And as families go, there are those who say, well, he left the ministry when he stepped down from that high pulpit and picked up the podium. He wasn't in ministry any longer. And I want to say to you, I think that's wrong. If you take the gospel seriously, if you take this scripture passage literally, this is a story about a man who goes to rescue a lamb. Not ministry. And the news this morning made the gospel even more important. That the pastor asked to do his funeral has declined. Because he's not sure if John is a Christian. This is so private and yet so public. This is important. How do you decide about your ministry? And so I want to say to you, to myself, do the work you have been called to do. Let the world and the church decide how to label it. Do the work you have been called to do. And do I think that Jesus Christ, firstborn of creation, recognizes John, knows him by name? Absolutely. And how do I know that? Because the Bible tells me so. The Pharisees said, look at this man. Look at this man. He eats with sinners and tax collectors. And in response, Jesus tells them a story. While they're sitting at a table where tax collectors and tax protesters and Syrophoenician women and their dogs and Ethiopians and their cats are all gathered to hear the very, very good news from a shepherd who will not abide, leaving one of us behind.
Yeah.